He thought she didn't belong in first class, but within minutes, a single phone call would unravel everything he thought he controlled. The airport terminal at Gate A12 hummed with the low, constant rhythm of rolling suitcases and distant announcements echoing overhead, the polished floors reflecting the soft glow of early morning lights streaming through massive glass windows. And among the tailored suits, designer handbags, and quiet confidence of seasoned travelers, Emily Carter stood almost invisible, her presence simple, unassuming, easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention, which most people weren't. Her coat was plain, a soft beige worn at the edges, her carry-on a modest black bag that had clearly seen years of careful use. And her hair was tied back neatly, not styled to impress but to stay out of the way. Yet there was something about her stillness, something grounded and steady, like she wasn't trying to belong because she already knew exactly where she stood. The first-class boarding line had just begun to form, a subtle shift in posture among passengers as they stepped forward with quiet entitlement, boarding passes held loosely like silent proof of status, and Emily stepped into that line without hesitation, her movements calm, her eyes forward, as if this was just another routine part of her day, nothing extraordinary, nothing to prove. A few heads turned, not dramatically, just enough to notice, just enough to question, the kind of glances that linger half a second too long, quietly measuring, quietly judging, and near the boarding scanner stood Olivia Brooks, the flight manager, her navy uniform crisp, her posture sharp, her smile practiced but thin, the kind of smile that could shift instantly depending on who stood in front of her. And as her eyes scanned the line, greeting passengers with polite efficiency, they paused. When they reached Emily, it wasn't immediate, not obvious, just a slight narrowing, a subtle tilt of the head, the kind of reaction trained into someone who believed they could read people at a glance. And in that moment, Olivia had already decided something about Emily, something unspoken but firm. The line moved forward. Inch by inch, the soft beep of scanned boarding passes punctuating the air, and when Emily stepped up, offering her ticket with a quiet, "Good morning," Olivia didn't take it right away, instead letting her gaze drift from Emily's shoes to her coat to the worn handle of her bag, and then back to her face, the pause stretching just long enough to be noticed, just long enough to make the air feel slightly heavier. Around them, a few passengers slowed, curiosity flickering in their eyes, the subtle shift of attention that always follows the scent of something about to go wrong. And Emily remained still, her expression unchanged, her hand steady as she held out her boarding pass. Not defensive, not apologetic, simply waiting. Olivia finally reached out, but not with warmth, not with the effortless politeness she had shown others, her fingers taking the ticket with a measured slowness, as if even that small gesture required confirmation. And as she glanced down at the pass, then back up at Emily, there was a question forming behind her eyes, one she hadn't yet spoken, but one that was already hanging in the air between them, heavy, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Olivia's eyes flicked back down to the boarding pass, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the paper, as if she expected it to reveal something hidden under pressure, and when the scanner light blinked green for the passenger before Emily, the soft approval tone seemed almost louder than usual, drawing a faint shift of attention from those nearby. But when it was Emily's turn, Olivia did not immediately move to scan the ticket, instead letting a quiet pause settle between them, the kind that stretched just long enough to feel intentional, just long enough for the surrounding murmurs to begin to grow. "Where are you seated, ma'am?" Olivia asked, her tone polite on the surface but carrying a subtle edge, a hint of disbelief that did not quite match the question itself, and Emily answered calmly, "First class," her voice steady, not defensive, not proud, simply factual, as if stating the time of day. That answer hung in the air for a brief second, and a man standing a few feet behind her shifted his weight, glancing at her again, this time more openly, curiosity replacing the earlier indifference, while another passenger further back let out a quiet, almost imperceptible breath, the kind that signaled silent agreement with an assumption no one had yet voiced aloud. Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line before she offered a tight smile, the kind that did not reach her eyes, and she turned the boarding pass slightly, examining it again as though it might change under a different angle of light. "I see," she said, her voice now carrying a trace of formality that felt rehearsed, and without looking at Emily, she added, "We just need to verify a few details." The words were simple, but the tone shifted the atmosphere instantly, transforming a routine boarding process into something far more deliberate, far more public. Emily did not react outwardly, her posture unchanged, her hand now resting lightly at her side, but her eyes followed Olivia's movements with quiet attentiveness, not confused, not intimidated, simply aware. Olivia tapped something on her handheld device, her nails clicking softly against the screen, and then glanced toward a colleague nearby, exchanging a brief look that carried more meaning than words, a silent signal that drew the colleague's attention closer. "Could you step aside for a moment?" Olivia said, finally looking directly at Emily, her voice lowering just enough to suggest discretion, but still loud enough for those nearest to hear, and the subtle shift in language, from inclusion in the line to separation from it, did not go unnoticed. A few passengers leaned slightly, their bodies angled just enough to observe without appearing obvious, their interest now fully engaged, because there was something universally compelling about watching someone be quietly singled out. Emily hesitated for only a fraction of a second, not out of uncertainty, but out of recognition of what was happening, and then she stepped to the side as requested, her movements controlled, her expression still composed, as if she had encountered this exact moment before, perhaps more times than anyone around her could imagine. Olivia followed, maintaining a professional distance, but her presence carried a firmness now, a certainty that she was correcting something that should never have occurred, and as she spoke again, her voice carried just enough authority to draw a wider circle of attention. "There appears to be an issue with your boarding," she said, choosing her words carefully, though the implication behind them was anything but neutral, and for a brief moment, the entire space seemed to hold its breath, the low hum of the terminal fading into the background as the situation sharpened into focus. Emily looked at her, calm and steady, and asked simply, "What kind of issue?" And it was in that question, quiet and direct, that something shifted, not in volume, not in movement, but in the invisible tension that now connected every person within earshot, because everyone could feel it, that this was no longer just about a boarding pass, and whatever came next would not end quietly. Olivia inhaled slowly, as if preparing to deliver something official, something that would justify the attention now gathering around them, and when she spoke, her voice carried that same measured tone, polished and controlled, but unmistakably firm. "Your ticket indicates a first-class seat." "Yes," she said, glancing once more at the printed details. "However, there seems to be a discrepancy in our system regarding passenger verification." The words sounded procedural, almost harmless, but the way she held the boarding pass slightly away from her body, as though distancing herself from it, told a different story, one that the surrounding passengers were already beginning to interpret in their own quiet ways. A man in a tailored charcoal suit folded his arms, watching with mild interest, while a woman with a designer handbag leaned subtly toward her companion, whispering something that ended with a faint shake of her head, the unspoken assumption spreading like a ripple through still water. Emily listened without interruption, her gaze steady on Olivia, not challenging, not submissive, simply present, and after a brief pause, she replied, "I booked the ticket 3 weeks ago. I checked in online this morning. Everything went through." Her voice was calm, even, offering facts without emotion, but that calmness only seemed to deepen Olivia's suspicion rather than ease it. Olivia nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging the statement without accepting it, and then tapped her device again, her movements slightly sharper now, more deliberate, as though each action was reinforcing a conclusion she had already reached. "Sometimes these things happen," she said, though her tone suggested the opposite, that this was not a random error, but something expected, something predictable. "We just need to make sure that all passengers in first class meet the appropriate requirements." The phrase lingered, heavier than it should have been, and a subtle shift passed through the small crowd that had now formed an unspoken perimeter around them, because everyone heard it, everyone understood what was being implied, even if no one said it out loud. Emily's eyes did not waver, but there was a slight tightening at the corner of her mouth, not anger, not embarrassment, but recognition, the quiet acknowledgement of a pattern she had likely encountered before, And for a moment, she said nothing, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to make Olivia continue. If you could provide an additional form of identification, or perhaps proof of purchase confirmation, we can look into this further, Olivia added, her voice maintaining that same polite structure, though now it carried a trace of impatience, as if expecting resistance, as if preparing for it. Emily reached into her bag without haste, retrieving her phone, her movements precise and unhurried, and as she unlocked the screen, the reflection of the terminal lights flickered briefly across her face, revealing nothing but composure. She scrolled for a moment, then held up the confirmation email, the subject line clear, the seat assignment unmistakable, and offered it forward without a word. Olivia glanced at it, but only briefly, her eyes skimming rather than reading, as though the evidence itself was secondary to the narrative already forming in her mind. That may not be sufficient, she said, straightening slightly, her posture now more authoritative, more public, and at that moment, the situation crossed an invisible line, shifting from verification into judgment. A soft murmur passed through the onlookers, not loud, not disruptive, but present, feeding the tension, amplifying the moment, and Emily lowered her phone slowly, her gaze returning to Olivia with the same quiet steadiness, and asked, "Then what exactly are you saying?" Her voice did not rise, did not waver, but it carried a clarity that cut through the surrounding noise, and for a fraction of a second, Olivia hesitated, just long enough for doubt to flicker behind her eyes before it was quickly replaced by resolve. "I am saying," Olivia replied, choosing each word carefully, "that until this is fully verified, I cannot allow you to board first class." The sentence landed with a finality that silenced even the softest whispers, and in that stillness, the weight of the decision settled over the gate like a shadow, because everyone could feel it now, that this was no longer about a system error, and whatever happened next would define more than just a seat assignment. For a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire gate area had collectively decided to hold its breath and watch how this would unfold. And in that suspended silence, Emily Carter stood exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her expression calm in a way that felt almost out of place against the tightening atmosphere around her. Olivia Brooks shifted her weight slightly, adjusting her stance as though reinforcing her authority, her fingers still holding the boarding pass but no longer offering it back, and when she spoke again, her voice carried more volume now, just enough to ensure it reached beyond Emily to the growing circle of attention. "You are welcome to speak with customer service after we complete boarding," she said, her tone final, procedural, as if closing a case that no longer required discussion, and with that, she made a small gesture toward the general boarding area, subtly redirecting Emily away from the first-class line, away from the space she had quietly claimed. A faint ripple moved through the nearby passengers, some shifting uncomfortably, others watching with open curiosity, their expressions a mixture of interest and quiet judgment, because moments like this carried a strange gravity, drawing people in even when they said nothing at all. Emily's eyes followed the gesture for a second, then returned to Olivia, steady and clear, and there was a pause, not long, but long enough to make the distance between them feel more significant than a few feet of polished floor. "So you are denying me boarding?" Emily asked, her voice soft but unmistakably precise, and the question did not challenge, did not accuse. It simply clarified, stripping the situation down to its core in a way that left little room for ambiguity. Olivia's lips pressed together before she responded, a flicker of irritation crossing her features as if the simplicity of the question had disrupted the structure she preferred. "I am denying you access to first class until verification is complete," she corrected, emphasizing the distinction, though the effect remained the same, and the people listening knew it. A man near the front of the line cleared his throat quietly, glancing away, while another passenger checked his watch, pretending not to be involved, though his ears remained tuned to every word. Emily exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, and for the first time, her gaze drifted briefly toward the large windows beyond the gate, where planes moved slowly across the runway in the distance, their engines humming with quiet purpose, as if the world outside continued unaffected by the moment unfolding inside. When she looked back, there was no frustration in her eyes, no visible anger, only a calm that felt deliberate, chosen, and she nodded once, almost to herself, as if acknowledging something internally rather than responding to Olivia directly. Her hand moved to her bag, not hurried, not defensive, and she reached inside with the same measured precision she had shown from the beginning, retrieving her phone once more, the screen lighting up softly in her palm. Around them, the tension shifted again, subtle but noticeable, because even those who had been silently observing could sense that something was changing, that this moment was not ending in the quiet compliance Olivia seemed to expect. Emily glanced at the screen for a brief second, then brought it to her ear, her movements smooth, unhurried, as though making an ordinary call in an ordinary moment. And when she spoke, her voice was low, calm, and entirely free of urgency. "Daniel," she said, the name simple, familiar, carrying no weight on its own. "I think there is a problem at the gate." The words were not dramatic, not loud, but they landed with a quiet certainty that shifted the air once more, because there was something in her tone, something steady and assured, that did not match the position she had just been placed in, and for a fraction of a second, Olivia's expression faltered, just enough to reveal a flicker of uncertainty before it was quickly masked again by professionalism, while the surrounding passengers leaned ever so slightly closer, drawn in by the sense that whatever came next would not follow the script anyone had expected. The name lingered in the air longer than it should have, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because of the quiet certainty with which Emily had spoken it, as if the outcome of this moment had already been decided somewhere far beyond the gate, far beyond the reach of the people standing around her. And for a brief second, nothing changed, nothing moved. The boarding line continued in hesitant increments, the soft beeping of scanned passes resuming like a system trying to ignore a disruption it did not yet understand. Olivia Brooks straightened her posture, her expression tightening as she glanced toward the line, signaling for the next passenger to step forward, her voice returning to its practiced rhythm. "Next, please," as though the situation beside her had already been resolved, as though Emily had become nothing more than a delay to be managed and forgotten. But Emily did not move, her phone still at her ear, her gaze steady, not on Olivia, not on the crowd, but somewhere slightly beyond, as if focused on something no one else could see. And when the voice on the other end responded, though no one else could hear it, something in her expression shifted ever so slightly, not relief, not urgency, but acknowledgement. "Yes," she said quietly, her tone unchanged. "I am at gate A12. They say there is a problem with my ticket." The words were simple, almost understated, but they carried a clarity that seemed to ripple outward, drawing attention again despite Olivia's attempt to move past it. And a few passengers who had begun to step forward slowed, their curiosity pulling them back into the moment. Olivia's eyes flicked toward Emily again, just for a second, a subtle check, a silent question forming behind her composed exterior, but she quickly returned her attention to the boarding process, scanning another pass, offering another polite nod, maintaining the appearance of control. Yet the control felt thinner now, more fragile, like a surface that could crack under the right pressure. Emily listened for a moment longer, then spoke again, her voice still calm, still measured. "No, I am not upset. I just wanted you to know." There was no accusation in her tone, no demand, and that absence of emotion made it harder to dismiss, harder to categorize, because it did not fit the expectation of someone being publicly denied, and that alone created a subtle unease that began to spread, invisible but undeniable. She lowered the phone slightly, not ending the call, just holding it near her side, as if waiting, and that waiting carried a different kind of weight, not passive, not uncertain, but deliberate, like a pause placed exactly where it needed to be. Seconds passed, then another, and the ambient noise of the terminal seemed to return, conversations resuming in hushed tones, footsteps echoing across the polished floor, the distant announcement of another flight boarding somewhere far away. Yet beneath it all, there was a tension that had not released, a quiet awareness that this moment had not ended, it had only shifted. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, something changed. Olivia's handheld device emitted a soft chime, different from the usual scanning tone, sharper, more insistent, and she glanced down at it, her expression neutral as she tapped the screen, but as her eyes moved across the information, that neutrality faltered, just slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face before she quickly masked it again. Another chime followed, this time from the terminal behind her, a notification appearing on the system monitor, and the colleague she had signaled earlier leaned in, whispering something under her breath, her tone no longer casual, but edged with uncertainty. Olivia's posture stiffened, her fingers moving more quickly now, tapping through screens, checking, rechecking, and for the first time since this interaction began, there was a visible break in her composure, a hesitation that did not belong to someone who believed they were in control. Around them, the passengers sensed it immediately, the shift in energy, the subtle change in authority, and the quiet murmurs began again, softer this time, more cautious, as if the narrative they had assumed was starting to unravel in ways they had not anticipated. Emily remained exactly where she was, still, composed, her phone resting lightly in her hand, her eyes steady, not watching Olivia, not watching the system, but simply present, as if she had already seen this moment before it arrived. And as the silence began to stretch once more, it carried a different weight now, not of judgment, but of realization, slowly, unmistakably taking shape. The second notification did not sound like the first. It was louder, sharper, cutting through the ambient noise of the terminal in a way that made even those who had tried to look away turn back again. And this time Olivia did not immediately mask her reaction, her eyes widening just enough to betray that something unexpected had appeared on her screen. She tapped quickly, her movements no longer measured but urgent, scrolling through lines of information that seemed to contradict everything she had just asserted minutes ago. And beside her, the colleague who had leaned in earlier straightened abruptly, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "What is that?" the colleague whispered, but Olivia did not answer, her focus locked on the device, her lips parting slightly, as if searching for a response that did not come. Another alert followed, this time from the main terminal. System, a flashing message that drew the attention of a supervisor stationed a few steps away, and he turned, noticing the change in Olivia's posture, the break in her rhythm, and walked over with a quiet but deliberate urgency. "Is there an issue?" he asked, his voice low but firm, the kind of tone that expected clarity, not confusion, and for a brief second, Olivia hesitated before turning the screen toward him, her hand not entirely steady. The supervisor's eyes moved quickly across the display, his expression tightening with each passing second, and then he looked up, not at Emily, not at the crowd, but directly at Olivia. And in that look there was something unmistakable, something that shifted the balance of the entire situation without a single word being spoken. Around them, the murmurs grew again, softer this time, more cautious, because the certainty that had once surrounded Olivia was beginning to dissolve, replaced by something far less stable, far less predictable. Emily remained where she was, her posture unchanged, her phone now resting at her side. The call clearly ended, yet the presence of it still lingered, like the cause of a ripple that had not yet reached its edge. The supervisor stepped closer to Olivia, lowering his voice further, but not enough to completely shield it from those nearest to them, and the fragments of his words drifted outward, carried by the charged silence. "This account, priority flag, executive-level authorization," he said, each phrase landing with increasing weight, and Olivia's face paled slightly as she listened, her earlier confidence replaced by a flicker of realization that she could not hide. "There must be some mistake," she said quickly, her voice no longer steady, her words coming faster now as if trying to regain control, but the supervisor did not respond immediately, instead glancing toward Emily for the first time, really looking at her, not as a passenger to be processed, but as someone who had just shifted the entire context of the moment. The line of passengers had stopped completely now, no one stepping forward, no one speaking, the soft hum of the terminal fading into the background as the weight of the unfolding realization settled over the gate like a quiet storm. Olivia swallowed, her grip tightening on the device as she scrolled again, as if hoping the information would change, as if it would revert back to something familiar, something manageable, but it did not, and the longer she looked, the clearer it became that the narrative she had constructed, the assumptions she had acted on, were unraveling in real time. The supervisor straightened, his expression now composed but serious, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a different authority, one that did not need volume to command attention. "We need to correct this immediately," he said, not to Emily, but to Olivia, and in that moment, the shift was complete, the invisible line of power that had once placed Olivia in control now moving decisively away from her. Emily met his gaze briefly, her expression calm, unchanged, as if none of this surprised her, as if she had been waiting not for validation, but for the truth to reveal itself, and as the silence deepened once more, it was no longer the silence of judgment, but the silence of recognition, spreading quietly through every person who had witnessed what had just begun to unfold. The supervisor did not raise his voice, yet the weight of his words settled over the gate with a clarity that silenced even the faintest whisper, and Olivia felt it immediately, the shift that could not be undone, the moment when authority quietly moved away from her and into something far beyond her reach. He took a small step forward, positioning himself between Olivia and Emily, not in a confrontational way, but in a manner that redefined the structure of the interaction, and when he spoke again, his tone was no longer questioning, it was directive. "Ms. Carter," he said, addressing Emily with a respect that had not been present before, "I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. There has been a serious error on our end." The words landed with precision, each one carrying a different meaning than anything that had been said moments earlier, and around them, the passengers who had been watching exchanged subtle glances, their earlier assumptions dissolving into something far less certain. Emily met his gaze, her expression unchanged, her calm intact, as if the apology was expected but not necessary, and she nodded once, a small acknowledgement rather than a reaction. Olivia stood slightly behind him now, her posture no longer rigid, her confidence no longer visible, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of where to place her hands, her attention, her authority. The supervisor continued, glancing briefly at the system display before returning his focus to Emily. "Your boarding status is not only valid, it has been flagged under executive priority clearance," he said, choosing his words carefully, aware that each one carried weight beyond the immediate situation, and the phrase itself seemed to ripple through the air, reaching the ears of those close enough to hear, triggering a quiet realization that spread faster than any explanation could contain. A man near the front of the line straightened slightly, his earlier expression of mild curiosity replaced with something closer to discomfort, while the woman with the designer handbag lowered her gaze, suddenly less interested in observing. Olivia inhaled sharply, as if about to speak, but the words did not come, and when she finally managed to form a sentence, her voice lacked the certainty it had carried before. "I was following protocol," she said, though even she seemed to recognize how insufficient that sounded in the context now unfolding. The supervisor did not immediately respond to her, his attention remaining on Emily, as if prioritizing the correction over the justification, and after a brief pause, he added, "We have also received direct communication from corporate regarding this matter." That sentence shifted the atmosphere once more, deeper this time, because it implied something larger, something structured, something intentional, and the silence that followed was no longer filled with curiosity, but with understanding, the kind that arrives slowly and settles heavily. Emily's phone vibrated softly in her hand, a subtle movement that did not go unnoticed, and she glanced down at it briefly before returning her attention to the supervisor, her composure unchanged, her presence steady. "Everything is being handled," she said quietly, not as a reassurance, but as a simple statement of fact, and the way she said it carried a certainty that no longer needed to be proven. The supervisor nodded, a slight shift in his posture reflecting a new level of awareness, and then he turned slightly, addressing Olivia in a lower voice, though the seriousness of his tone was unmistakable. "We will discuss this after boarding," he said, and the finality of that statement left no room for interpretation. Olivia's face tightened, a flush rising beneath her composed exterior, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, her earlier authority now reduced to silent compliance. The boarding line remained still, no one stepping forward, no one speaking, because the moment had transformed completely. What had begun as a quiet act of exclusion had now become something else entirely, something that exposed not just a mistake, but a judgment. And as Emily stood there, calm and unshaken, the realization settled over everyone present that they had not just witnessed an error being corrected. They had witnessed a truth being revealed, one that could not be undone. And for the first time since this began, the silence that filled the space was not tense, not uncertain, but absolute, the kind that comes when the outcome is no longer in question. The supervisor stepped slightly aside, creating a clear path toward the boarding scanner, his gesture subtle but unmistakable. And for a moment, no one moved, as if the entire space needed a second to recalibrate, to adjust to the reality that had just replaced assumption. Then he turned fully toward Emily, his expression composed but carrying a level of deference that had not existed before, and with a small nod, he said, "Ms. Carter, you are cleared to board at your convenience." The words were simple, but they carried quiet, almost uneasy respect. Emily did not respond immediately, not with words, not with movement. She simply held the moment for a fraction of a second, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged, as if acknowledging the shift without needing to react to it. And then she stepped forward, her movements as calm and measured as they had been from the beginning. The soft hum of the scanner returned as the device was reset, and this time, when her boarding pass was placed beneath it, there was no hesitation, no pause, just a clean, clear tone, the kind that signaled approval without question, and that single sound seemed to echo more loudly than it should have, cutting through the stillness like a quiet confirmation of everything that had just unfolded. Olivia stood just to the side now, no longer at the center of the interaction, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, her gaze lowered for a brief moment before she forced herself to look up again, and when her eyes met Emily's, there was no longer judgment there, no trace of the earlier certainty, only a restrained awareness of what had transpired, and the weight of it was evident in the slight tension along her jaw. Emily did not linger on her, did not pause, did not offer a reaction that could be interpreted as triumph or resentment. She simply inclined her head slightly, a gesture so small it could have been missed, yet it carried something undeniable, not forgiveness, not acknowledgement, but closure, the quiet kind that required no words. Behind her, the line remained still, no one rushing forward, no one eager to reclaim their place, because the moment had shifted beyond routine. It had become something observed, something understood, and even those who had not heard every word could feel the change in the air, the difference between before and after. The supervisor remained where he was, watching Emily as she moved toward the jet bridge, his posture steady, his expression thoughtful, as if aware that this moment would extend beyond the gate, beyond the flight, into something that would need to be addressed long after the passengers had boarded. Olivia exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her shoulders in a controlled release, but it did not restore what had been lost, and she glanced once more at the system display, the executive priority flag still visible, still undeniable, and for the first time, she seemed to understand not just the mistake, but the assumption that had led to it. A quiet murmur passed through the remaining passengers, softer now, more reflective, as they began to move again, one by one stepping forward, their boarding passes ready, their expressions more subdued, as if something in the atmosphere had recalibrated their own sense of certainty. And as Emily walked down the jet bridge, her silhouette gradually blending into the soft light beyond the gate, she did not look back, not at the people, not at the place, because there was nothing left to prove, nothing left to correct, only the quiet continuation of a journey that had never truly been interrupted. And behind her, the space she left behind remained still for just a moment longer, holding the weight of what had been revealed before the rhythm of the terminal slowly returned, carrying with it a silence that felt different now, deeper and far more aware. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere felt quieter than the terminal, the soft ambient lighting casting a warm glow over the wide leather seats of first class. And as Emily Carter stepped into the cabin, the flight attendant at the entrance straightened immediately, her posture shifting with a level of attentiveness that had clearly been communicated moments before. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Carter," she said, her voice calm but noticeably more deliberate than a standard greeting, and Emily offered a small nod in return, her expression unchanged, her composure intact, as if nothing outside had disrupted the steady rhythm of her day. She moved down the aisle with the same measured pace, her hand lightly guiding her carry-on, her eyes briefly scanning the cabin before settling on her assigned seat. And as she placed her bag gently into the overhead compartment, there was no rush, no tension, only a quiet continuation of something that had never truly been interrupted. Around her, a few passengers already seated in first class glanced up, some recognizing the subtle shift in the crew's behavior, others simply observing out of habit, but none spoke, because even here, the weight of what had occurred seemed to linger, carried in through the open door of the aircraft like a silent echo. Emily took her seat, smoothing her coat slightly before settling back, her movements precise, unhurried, and as she fastened her seatbelt, the faint click sounded almost ceremonial, marking the end of a moment that had unfolded far beyond the confines of a boarding gate. A few minutes later, the lead flight attendant approached, her expression composed but carrying a trace of concern that had not been present before, and she leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice just enough to maintain discretion. "We sincerely apologize for what happened at the gate," she said, her tone genuine, careful, as if aware that the apology carried more weight than words alone could convey. And Emily looked up at her, her gaze steady, her expression calm. "Thank you," she replied softly, not dismissive, not inviting further explanation, simply acknowledging the effort without extending the moment, and the flight attendant nodded, understanding that nothing more was required, that whatever had needed to be said had already been said. Outside, the final passengers began to board, the distant hum of the terminal fading as the cabin door prepared to close, and somewhere beyond the walls of the aircraft, conversations were already shifting, reports being made, decisions forming, consequences aligning with actions that could not be undone. Back at the gate, Olivia Brooks remained standing near the terminal, her posture still, her hands now resting at her sides, and though the crowd had begun to disperse, the space around her felt different, heavier, as if the silence itself carried memory, and the supervisor's earlier words echoed quietly in her mind, not loud, not harsh, but undeniable. She glanced once more at the system screen, the executive clearance still visible, and for the first time, she did not look for an error, she did not question it. She simply understood what it meant, and more importantly, what her actions had meant in the face of it. The lesson did not arrive with noise or confrontation, it arrived in stillness, in the absence of what she once believed to be certainty. And as the final boarding call faded into the background, she exhaled slowly, the realization settling in fully, not as punishment, but as something deeper, something that would remain long after the flight had departed. Inside the aircraft, Emily closed her eyes briefly, not in exhaustion, not in relief, but in quiet reflection, and as the plane began to push back from the gate, the world outside shifting slowly beneath the morning light, there was a sense of balance restored, not through force, not through confrontation, but through a simple truth revealed at exactly the moment it needed to be. And in that stillness, as the engines grew louder and the runway stretched ahead, the lesson remained, unspoken yet undeniable, that dignity does not announce itself, it simply exists, waiting for the world to recognize it when it matters most.